Hello, everybody. Welcome to the stream. We are back for some more analysis, some more Formula One, and to be honest, that qualifying, I know that in heat of the moment, it's easy to overhype something, but that was one of the best qualifyings I think we've had all year, and that you probably ever see. I mean, to have four different drivers in the first four places, to have first Norris, then Sainz, then Russell, given the cars they're in, it's pretty insane. And I think that even though, look, on paper, we are tired of seeing the Mercs being at the top this season with Verstappen and Red Bull and with the whole midfield and the whole kind of unpredictability of the grid, it's been fantastic. So, again, we had another fantastic qualifying. And there's a lot to go through, but the first thing is quite obvious. Lando Norris taking his first ever F1 pole, and it was really sublime. I think that frankly this year he's been knocking on the door for a pole for pretty much the whole season. He's been very consistent in qualifying and in the race. He at one point was on, I think, a 12 or 13 race point streak. So he really does, I think, deserve this pole. I think for the sub menu, thank you very much. And to see him take pole here is very rewarding. And what I would take away more than anything here today is that tomorrow's race is going to be interesting. Because Hamilton starts P4. Now, even though on paper he should be able to win this race from where he is, he has to get a good start. Because if he ends up, say, 5th or 6th after lap 1, with how hard overtaking is, it could be hard for him to catch Lando. Because say after lap 1, it's Norris first, then Sainz, then Russell. The issue that Hamilton will have is that overtaking Russell and Sainz will be complicated, and in that time, Norris could extend his gap. But at the same time, Russell could, be leading after turn 1. So it's going to be a very, very fun race. And the good news is that unlike in Spa, where we had a crazy qualifying, but it was, well, there was no actual race, it's going to be dry, or it's supposed to be quite dry tomorrow. So we're going to see action tomorrow regardless of what happens, and it should be very, very fun. Great to see you in chat, Sartha, hopefully you're doing well. I want to actually ask you guys in chat who you think had the best qualifying. Was it Lando? Was it George? Was it Sainz? And I think Sainz today, he lived up to the hype. I think that before this weekend, many people were saying that if it rains, Sainz is going to be dangerous. Because as we saw in Imola, as we saw in Turkey last year, he's very quick in the wet. And there was pressure on him today, I think, with Leclerc's issue to kind of lead Ferrari. He's had a few instances this year, a few issues here and there. But today, he was consistent, hardly made any mistakes, he made none. And even in Q2 he was close to being knocked out, it didn't matter because in Q3 when it mattered, he was bold, he went on the softs early, and it really, really helped him to take a fantastic P2. He was actually saying though post-quali that he's not as happy with P2 just because it's on the dirty part of the track. So even I think that arguably starting P3 is the best place for Sochi. But ultimately, if you get a good start, then you kind of supersede or counteract any negatives or positives. Chinmaya, great to see you in chat. And yeah, I think to be fair, that's a completely fair statement. I think that Lando's qualifying was fantastic. And also, if you look at the gaps to their teammates, with Sainz, you couldn't see, obviously, his gap to Leclerc. And with Russell, we couldn't see his gap to Latifi after Latifi did go out again because of his engine change. But Lando's gap to Ricciardo was massive. It must have been, was it 2 seconds or so? Maybe I'm wrong and I'm exaggerating. I'll double check. But he had a very big gap to his teammate, which makes it even more impressive. So a great job for him. But also Carlos Sainz, as again, given Leclerc's penalty, there was a very big risk that Ferrari could lose even more ground or lose too much ground this weekend. But with Carlos starting in P2, that gives them a good chance to maximise their points tomorrow. And because of Verstappen's penalty and because of now Latifi's engine change, Leclerc starts P18, not P20, which may not sound significant, but those two places could help him in the race. Yeah, I mean, tomorrow it's predicted to be pretty light rain, which is, I think, a good thing, because whilst the rain spices things up, I don't want to have any more kind of Spa-esque, kind of controversies or delays. So it's great to see, to see how things kind of develop throughout the weekend, and to see, in a way, how, despite all the kind of risks and the fears during, I would say, Friday, and even this morning until really 12 a.m., we had an amazing qualifying, and the race could be even better. Kappa, that's a good point. But what I would say is, if you look at last year, I think it was, who was starting on par? I think it may have been Lewis and Valtteri second. I think that Lewis kept P1 after turn one. And actually, Kappa, that's a good point. Speaking of turn ones, I think that the key tomorrow through turn one is just going to be avoiding the outside line. Now, on paper, you might think that on the outside you can avoid the traffic, but every single year, because of the nature of turn two and the kind of turn three that isn't called turn three, but because of the nature of the first braking zone, if you're on the outside, you're going to lose out. Because even though in theory you can carry more speed if you want to, in order to make the corner and not cut the chicane and then hit the sausage curbs and damage your car, you have to turn right a lot to get back onto the racing line. And that'll cost you time. So you either go very slowly around the outside into turn two, or you go off into the runoff and lose time as well. So I think the key for tomorrow, guys, and keep an eye on this, especially if you're in the middle and near the back, is to be on the inside line. Because on the outside, you're going to get pushed out, you're going to be on the sausage curb, and you're going to be at risk. So I think that's going to be a key. I don't know. I feel as though when it comes to predicting crashes, people are very eager to say this will happen, but it's often just kind of random hypotheses. We'll see what happens on lap one. What I would say is, I'm curious to see out of the top three who has the best start, because we haven't seen any of them necessarily at the front or fighting, or I would say starting in the top 2-3 places very much. So I'm curious to see how they start. And even though Williams aren't the best car in the grid, obviously, I think that if they do well, if Russell can start well, he'll have a chance to defend for a decent enough period. So we'll see how that goes. But I think that the key for the championship and for Lewis is to overtake early. Because if Lewis can't pass early, that'll make his life difficult, and it'll make kind of Verstappen's kind of damage limitation far more rewarding in the end. But I want to do a quick tier list, actually. I think that could be interesting. But first, I want to go through our winners. So our winners for qualifying, our kind of best drivers were obviously Norris and Russell. But our biggest struggles were, ironically, the Mercedes duo. I could have put Giovinazzi here, but I'll get onto him later. He's kind of someone who I don't really expect much from, especially in the wet. But Lewis and Valtteri, P4 and P7 in a Mercedes track isn't great. Now, of course, there was kind of an unknown variable. It was raining. That made life difficult. But as a top team, fighting for a championship, you have to be able to kind of circumvent, and you have to be able to get past those obstacles, because it's not always going to be a boring, dry race, dry qualifying. You have to be able to overcome those obstacles. And Williams and Mercedes today made several mistakes. The first was they brought in Hamilton too early, and Bottas as well. With the fastest car, all they really had to do was just copy the rest, and they waited for too long, and because of that, Hamilton and Bottas had compromised time to kind of get their tyres up to temp. But the biggest mistake was with Hamilton, because on paper, yes, even if he'd come out on track, it would have been close to actually do 2 flying laps. The main thing here is that if Hamilton doesn't crash, he's got an extra 45 seconds to get heat into those tyres. And that again compromised this qualifying, and also it compromised Valtteri's, because he was waiting for Lewis for those valuable seconds, and that again gave him less time to heat up those tyres. And what I've been saying this year, and what's happened really throughout the year, is that Mercedes and Hamilton, and Bottas, but focusing on the championship, Hamilton and Merck, they've made so many errors and they've dropped so many points that you have to wonder, is this really going to be their year? Because frankly, with Verstappen's DNF in Baku, with Verstappen's DNF in Silverstone, with his very bad luck in Hungary, I'm not saying that Lewis was to blame for those things, but the fact is, Merck have dropped so many points. Hungary, poor strategy. Baku, Lewis mistake. And even though on paper, Lewis could still win today, and he really should still win tomorrow in the race, it's another race where he's dropped points and he's not maximising. And he's just not keeping things clean. He's not, going through the motions and just keeping it professional. He's making mistakes. He's going wide. He's doing all of these things, which makes life very difficult, and which will encourage Verstappen, to be able to fight despite his issues that he's had this season. Faraway in chat says, I'd say George. I'd say it's George, since his car was the best lap. His car was the best lap. I mean, I see what you mean. I think that, yes. What I would say, though, is that Williams is fast in the wet, for sure. I mean, Nicholas Latifi, because of his track record of never qualifying Russell, it's not been spoken about much. But I do think that if Latifi had been out there, he would have done maybe, he would have maybe been in Q3. But even beyond that, the fact is that Williams, from what we saw in Q1 and from Spa, that Williams is a decent car in the wet. So whilst George has done well, I think that car is obviously pretty damn good in the wet. And even in the dry, isn't as bad as it has been. Anywhere near as bad as it has been in the past. Roads in the future, I might have a podcast, we'll see. but that's a very long term kind of project, I think. Shivam, people say that, and on paper, yes, you can, but you have to get a good start first. If George starts well, then he's in a good place. But ultimately, if Lando starts well and Russell has a poor start off the line, then it won't matter. So it's going to be a combination of slipstream, yes, but also a good start just from Russell himself. And frankly, his starts have cost him points throughout the year, or at least they've cost him positions and the chance of points throughout the year. So it'll be key for him to kind of avoid those moving forward. Well, you think Lewis is actually cracking? I mean, look, I don't really like the term pressure because I feel as though it implies indirectly that you're making mistakes because of some other thing aside from your driving. I wouldn't say he's cracking under pressure. I would say that he's just not driving well. He's driving poorly. Because when you say it's pressure, you're kind of giving an excuse almost, or you're arguing that it's some other factor. But I just say it's not pressure, it's just Lewis underperforming. And that's that. And of course, I've got very high standards of Hamilton. And this year, he's not meeting them. Now, could he win tomorrow? Yes. But frankly, with Max starting from the back, he should win tomorrow. And if he doesn't win the race on Sunday, then that would be even more points dropped. At least in part because of his mistake. Valtteri, of course, qualified P7, but he didn't, obviously crash in the pits. And I don't expect the same from him, especially in these kind of wet, dry, changeable conditions. So that's why I'm harder on Lewis than I am on Valtteri. And speaking of Valtteri, he finished ahead of Perez. Not amazing, but he's doing his job. Perez, though, was unlucky, I think. I think he was struggling. Oh, sorry, he didn't have much time on the softs, which is why he was so far down, because in Q1 and Q2, he had decent pace. But again, with Perez, it's now around 15, and I feel as though the excuses that they're piling up. So I really want to see him really pushing in the race tomorrow and having a good performance, because I feel as though with Perez, there's always something nowadays. And in the past, it was the opposite. It would be that he just does the job. But nowadays, of course, that Red Bull car is obviously a handful. And I'm not saying that he's a bad driver by any means, but I feel as though it's getting to a point where there's always something with Checo, and that's not a good sign. That's no good sign. Mubashir, I don't know. Honestly, I haven't seen the Yuki Seb incident. And I've checked since qualifying, and I'll check again very quickly. But it's not being looked into. So either, I'm not exactly sure what happened. It must be that the stewards didn't think it's worth investigating. And Aston Martin probably haven't complained about it. I'm not sure exactly why, but I've not seen it. Alex, yeah, I mean, Ferrari with Sainz, they're executed perfectly. And also, Leclerc was out in qualifying today because they were kind of getting some data on their engine. Because, of course, the engine for the rest of the year is like going to help them for next year's engine. So in that regard, they're basically been doing testing for next season, this year, which is actually quite smart from Ferrari. So Leclerc's pace, and obviously that data that he got from qualifying will help the team. And yeah, I think that it's a positive day for Ferrari, because of course, if Leclerc had been, without a penalty, he could have been fighting very easily for, easy Q3, possibly even top 6, top 5. But as it is, he did a very good job. Bertrand Rossi, I think that Lewis should still win tomorrow because he has the machinery. To me, there isn't any excuse for Lewis if he doesn't win tomorrow, and I think that he knows that. Las Sobras, thank you, mate. My mum's Spanish. I live in the UK. I've lived here my whole life. In terms of where I'm from and my kind of blood, half Spanish, half Cameroonian. I don't have any English family, which is why I've got obviously the British accent. But thank you. Tusha, Aston should have just sent him out earlier. I was talking about Seb. It's a shame with Seb because in Q2 he had very good pace. Q1 as well. It was looking very promising for him. But I think that he apparently got held up. But I think also they sent him out quite late. On those fresh tyres. Actually, like in hindsight, in Q1, Alonso went out on wets to begin with, and he set a flying lap, and I thought that's silly. But in the end, he just saved a set of tyres and set an actual competitive lap time on the Inters later on. So the key was to be able to really come in early, not solely that your tyres got worn, but say with 5-6 minutes to go, to have 2 or 3 laps on the fresh Inters and maximise the on-track grip. I think that was the key for today's qualifying. But moving on from that, I want to go to the kind of, I would say, not the winners or the losers, but the kind of just decent performances from today. And I think the most good performances from today are Alonso and Stroll. Now, of course, the standouts, let me sort that out, excuse me. The standouts were obviously Norris, Russell, Sainz, but they just good performances where they did well and maximized their car. Alonso and Stroll. Alonso P6 in the Alpine, and frankly, before Q3 he was looking as a dark horse for the top 5. But then, of course, in Q3 with the dry conditions, he didn't quite have the pace on the slicks. But still, P6, a very good qualifying. And honestly, as an Alonso fan, I was thinking that he'd struggle today. Because if you go back to Spa, in the wet he struggled. And if you go back to Imola, in the wet he struggled. Now, of course, in his career, Alonso's been very, very, very good in the wet. But this year with new cars, as he's adapting, I fear that he'd struggle. But to finish P6... in the Alpine, which doesn't seem to be the best in the wet, at least it wasn't in Spa. A very good job at qualifying Esteban, and given that his race pace is often very good, he'll get good points tomorrow, I'm sure, if he can just keep it clean. Now, on paper, Verstappen would probably pass Alonso, and Bottas would probably finish ahead as well. It's still worth kind of looking into, maybe if he can have a good start tomorrow, what he can do. But point being, good qualifying, P6 for Alpine, very solid. Lance Stroll, right beside him again, not amazing, not a standout kind of spectacular drive, but solid. And I think that Lance this year, he hasn't got the points that Seb has. I think he's 11 points behind, but his performances have been pretty good all year. They haven't been amazing, but they've been on par with Seb. And of course, Seb's kind of adapting to a new team and car. But still, Lance has been okay, and he's been quite lucky at some points this year, like in Baku, for example. So a good job from him today. P8 again with Lance at the back and Leclerc at the back. He'll be fighting harder to kind of get good points tomorrow. But still, a very solid qualifying from him ahead of Seb. So credit to him for that. Elabras, yeah. I'm half Spanish, so that's why I can speak or tweet in Spanish. And yeah, Shivam Stroll is decent. Not amazing, but decent. And of course, in the wet, Lance is often very good. And I think that he was one of the earlier drivers on the Inters, which meant that he didn't benefit from those kind of, from the extra grip and for those extra kind of dry conditions on track. But still, a good quality from him. Amici Ferreira says, if Tsunoda didn't block Seb, I mean, probably, to be fair, Lance and Seb were very close or quality. And in Spa, Lance couldn't set final lap in Q2 because of Aston Martin sending him out late. So that's part of motorsport. Sometimes you win them, sometimes you lose them. I'm not gonna, try and tarnish Lance's qualifying. But yeah. Top 5 finish. I don't want to make a prediction directly, but I still think that what I would say is when you've got a McLaren and a Ferrari and a Williams in the top 3, it's going to be very interesting to see. I think that the start will be crucial because I think Sainz and Norris have similar pace. So whoever's out in front will have the advantage in terms of clean air. And of course, if say Lando or Sainz end up P3 or below, then that will give the driver in first a big kind of buffer and advantage, especially if George is the one in second. So we'll see what happens tomorrow. Now, the forecast isn't that it'll be bone dry, but it should be pretty dry for the race. There might be some rain which could spice things up, but we'll see what happens. I'm not expecting much rain tomorrow, and frankly, I don't think that we need any rain for tomorrow to be a great race. But I'm optimistic for the Grand Prix tomorrow. It should be a really, really good one. Now, guys, before I go, I'm going to do a tier list of every driver in qualifying very quickly. So thanks to all of you who are watching. If you're new, please subscribe and hit the bell so that when I go live tomorrow for the race, watch along, and the race reaction, you're all here with me. But let's do the qualifying reaction very quickly. Or sorry, the tier list for this reaction stream. I'm not going to take too long, guys, because I have got other things to do. Not in a bad way, but because I'm just very busy today with all of the content and news. But I think there's some obvious ones here today. I think that Lando A-star goes without saying. George A-star goes without saying. Carlos A-star goes without saying. And then we've got quite a few A's. I would say Alonso is a very solid A tier. I would say the same thing for Lance. Who else can I put in A tier? It's hard to say. But actually, before I do A tier, I'll put who can I put? I'll put Leclerc and I'll put Max. And I'll even put Nicholas Latifi in, not applicable because they weren't able to run properly, so it's not really fair to judge them. The Alphas I'll put in C tier. Actually, I'll put Gio in D tier. Kimi in C. Kimi, first race back, he did okay. But the Alphas either don't have pace in the wet, or they've just got, or their drivers can't perform. But even if the Alpha isn't great, I put Giovinazzi in D tier because he was way off Kimi. He spun off just a very poor qualifying for Giovinazzi. I'll put Esteban B tier, just behind Alonso. Well, I mean, a fair amount behind Alonso, but a decent quali. And in Q3, so that's a good session for him. Yuki, I want to put him in B tier, but at the same time, Gasly was very much compromised. I put him in B tier, but I'm very lenient to B, just because he was right behind Pierre. But I do feel as though if Pierre had been able to get on fresh into sooner, it would have been a slam dunk C for Yuki and an A at least for Pierre. Actually, no, I'll put Yuki in C and then I'll put Pierre in B. Because even though I think Pierre had the pace, ultimately it's a combination of results and performance which kind of determines your ranking. And once Pierre had the performance or had the pace, his result was P11, or sorry, P12, which isn't really enough. I put 7 beta as well. Again, it would have been an A if he'd been a bit more lucky, but it comes down to a combination of result and performance. He had the pace, but ultimately, in Q2, he wasn't able to get through because of some bad luck. Mick gets a B from me. Very good qualifying, given that he's in that Haas. P, I think, 17 was it? Or P17 behind Kimi, ahead of Giovinazzi. I mean, even though the wet does kind of, in some ways, mitigate or minimize the effects of a car, that Haas is still going to be terrible in the wet. So to be ahead of an Alfa Romeo, decent job. Mazepin D, because he was way off his teammate, way off. And then Checo, I'll put in B, because he was also quite unlucky. He had the pace, but again, if you qualify P9 in a Red Bull, it's hard for me to rank him much higher. But I still think that he had a good pace. He was just a bit unlucky today. We could. It'll depend. I'm not completely confident that it will rain tomorrow, but if it does, that'll be very cool. And that also adds strategy and skill again into the mix even further. Kappa, I mean, Daniel did okay today, but he was 2 seconds off Lando. So even though, yes, on paper he had a pretty good qualifying, or he had a pretty good performance this year. Wait, hold on, I've lost my train of thought. Oh yes, okay, sorry. Even though Ricciardo qualified okay, P5, he was 2 seconds off Lando, which, I mean, is not great. So for the race, he has a good chance to score good points, but for me, if you qualify that far off your teammate, it's not really the best of quality, but it's still decent. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching. I'll be live again tomorrow for Formula 2 feature race, the F3 feature race, and for the F1 race. So see you all there. Thank you so much for watching. If you need to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so that when I'm live, you're all notified. Thank you so much, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.